Good evening, Shavua Tov, and on behalf of the Ida Crown Jewish Academy, welcome to this very special evening with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Shlita. This evening is sponsored by Terry and Andrew Herenstein as a zchut for Refuah Shleimah for Avraham Yaakov ben Racha Yocheved, Avrami Wiesenberg, and Moshe ben Rachel Leah Mori Friedman. We wish them a Refuah Shleimah. For the past several days, I have had the extraordinary honor to host Rabbi Sachs and his wife, Lady Elaine, as he made presentations at Northwestern University, University of Chicago, the Holocaust Museum, at this shul, and of course, to our students at the Academy. Each time Rabbi Sachs has spoken, I have been mesmerized by his insight, his knowledge, his ability to communicate, and of course, his humanity. He is a man who proves time and again the timelessness of the lessons of Torah, the brilliance of its truths, and the beauty of its message to all of humanity. And tonight, he is here with us as we celebrate an institution founded 73 years ago by another extraordinary Rav, a man whose eloquence was also legendary and whose efforts to build community led to the establishment of our day school movement and the transformation of Chicago Jewry, a man whose name also happened to be Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Menachem B. Sachs of blessed memory. Rabbi Sachs, when our first Rabbi Sachs gathered a group of dedicated lay leaders and most talented educators to create the very first Orthodox high school west of the Hudson, I don't believe they ever imagined that from their school would arise some of the greatest scholars, Roshei Yeshivot, businessmen, professionals, and Jewish leaders the world has ever known. But the Academy has achieved just that. But even more importantly, the Academy continues to prepare young men and women to lead inspired Jewish lives, lives of meaning and lives of purpose, lives of engagement and lives of community, lives that we are so very proud to have a hand in molding, and lives that I invite everyone here this evening to join us in supporting. But instead of talking about the Academy, about all that it continues to offer, a new generation of B'nai and B'not Torah, about our magnificent new campus that we'll be dedicating on December 13th, the 7th day of Hanukkah, and the opportunities that it will offer. This evening, I invite you to direct your attention to the screen for just a moment and watch. After all, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a video countless more.
Hope when you take that jump, you don't fear the fall. Hope when the water rises, you build a wall. Hope when the crowd screams out, they're screaming your name. Hope if everybody runs, you choose to stay. Hope that you fall in love and it hurts so bad. The only way you can know, you give it all you have. And I hope that you don't suffer, but take the pain. say, I did it all. I did it all. I owned every second that this world could give. I saw so many places, the things that I did. With every broken bone, I swear I lived. Hope that you spend your days, but they all add up. And when that sun goes down, hope you raise your cup. Oh, and I wish that I could witness all your joy and all your pain. But until my moment comes, I'll say, where I live. Stories don't grow old, I swear I live. Though some cannot be told, I swear I did it all. I did it all. Look back at the faces, the memories live. The pages are turning, much more to fill in. Soaring to new heights, a new day begins.
Shavua Tov, everyone. My name is Joshua Polster, and I am currently a senior at ICJA. Before I start, I'd like to recognize the many community rabbis and leaders here this evening, many of whom have directly impacted my life and education. I'd also like to welcome President Richard Joel from Yeshiva University, who is visiting Chicago this weekend. We are honored to have him with us, and just by the way, my application to IU is still pending. Yes, it is. ICJA has been an amazing place for my spiritual and academic growth. My teachers have inspired me to strive for knowledge and achievement in all areas of life and learning. Judaic studies are a major part of life as an academy student. Within the plethora of honors and accelerated classes in Gemara, Chumash, Navi, and Hebrew, is space for creativity and flexible learning to meet the needs of students from many different backgrounds. Beyond just learning inside the Sefer, I have created a Malachim Jeopardy game, debated the pros and cons of Jewish kings in Navi class, and presented a project on my family history in Gemara. I have emerged from my classes with essential Judaic knowledge and a love of Torah necessary to thrive in the modern world as a Ben Torah. An important feature of Jewish life at ICJA is also the integration of the Yeshiva University Torah Mitzion Kollel within the school. The Kollel provides many learning opportunities for students in various settings, including inspirational Yimei Iyun, a Friday morning Parsha Shir, an early morning Mitzuyanim Gemara program, and just being available to students. The Kollel rabbis are a dynamic resource for and influence on the students at the Academy, and their involvement in our school amplifies the already broad spectrum of Judaic learning at ICJA. In addition, the comprehensive Ida Crown General Studies curriculum has given me experience in history, math, science, and literature on many levels. My love of chemistry started in sophomore year and grew in junior year with AP chemistry. I learned to analyze Shakespeare during my freshman year and drastically improved my writing skills in AP English. The variety and range of academic offerings are the result of a tireless effort from the teachers and administration of the Academy, working to ensure the best possible education for every student. Ida Crown also creates amazing extracurricular opportunities beyond the classroom. I have had the opportunity to play interscholastic baseball, as well as learn the new sport of fencing. But there's also basketball, wrestling, cross-country, and soccer. These sports encourage a sense of camaraderie in Academy students, which can be seen in the massive ACES gear present on any given day in school. As Rabbi Sachs discussed when we addressed the students this past Thursday, happiness and success are found when the community acts as a whole, not when one focuses on the individual. Sports is a prime example of this concept, as teammates work and support each other for the benefit of the entire team. Beyond the playing field are many other activities available to students, from Israel advocacy to literary journal. This year, I am participating in the Jerusalem Science Contest, a series of tests sponsored by the Waldorf Foundation that culminates in a trip to Israel for the top-scoring students in America. The Academy has provided me and my classmates with exceptional opportunities, including being able to be here to introduce Rabbi Sachs tonight. A global religious leader, philosopher, best-selling author, and moral voice for our time, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs is currently the Ingeborg and Ira Renner Global Distinguished Professor of Judaic Thought at New York University, and the Kressel and Efrat Family University Professor of Jewish Thought at Yeshiva University. He is also a professor of law, ethics, and the Bible at King's College London. Rabbi Sachs previously served as Chief Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth from 1991 to 2013, only the sixth incumbent since the role's formalization in 1845. The author of 25 books, Rabbi Sachs has published commentaries on the Siddur, as well as on the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Pesach Machzorim. His most recent book, Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence, tackles a sensitive issue of religious extremism and violence committed in the name of God. The book was published in June of this year in the UK and was released here in the US this October. It is my extreme honor and pleasure to introduce Harav, Lord Jonathan Sachs.
Lovely tribute to what is a great school. Friends, the Ida Crown School is such a wonderful, wonderful educational center. Meeting the young people on Thursday, I was reminded yet again of what an absolute jewel in the crown you have in Ida Crown. It's a school that brings out the very best in its pupils, in Torah, in Chokhmah, and in Menschlichkeit, in Chesed. These are remarkable young people, and it is a great tribute to a great school. Friends, you know, if we were to identify a single factor in the survival against all the odds of the Jewish people, it would be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught us at a very early age that education is absolutely fundamental to what we are about. There's only one other civilization I know that has the same record, and that is China, and it's no secret that China and us have been around a long time. In fact, when I was Chief Rabbi, I used to be Chief Rabbi of Hong Kong, which used to be in something called the British Empire. I don't know quite what happened to the British Empire. We had to give back Hong Kong to the Chinese, sorry about that. But in 97, 98, just after the Brits handed it back, I went on my next visit to the Jewish community there, and of course I met the first Beijing appointee, Mr. Tung Chi-Wan, who turns out to feel exactly as I do, that Jews and Chinese have a great deal in common. In fact, he said to me, you Jews and we Chinese have been around for a long time. He said, we Chinese have been around for 5,000 years, you Jews been around for 6,000 years. What I always wanted to ask is, what did you do for the first 1,000 years before you had kosher Chinese takeaways? I said, Mr. Tung, you know what we did for the first 1,000 years? We complained about the food. But the thing that connects us is our love of education, and therefore we, like the Chinese, understand the truth of that wonderful saying, if you plan for a year, plant rice. If you plan for a decade, plant a tree. If you plan for a century, educate a child. And that is the secret that we have to remind the West. Jews survived and flourished under all circumstances, benign or adverse, because we made our citadels as our schools. Our heroes were our teachers, and our passion, education, and the life of the mind. So, congratulations on a great school. May it be in its new building, renewed and ever strengthened. And may you continue to send out, as builders of the Jewish future, the young people of this community of whom you can be proud. Thank you. Friends, my subject tonight is a serious one. Indeed, it couldn't be more serious. Because what prompted me, of course, to write Not in God's Name was the world's oldest hatred and the most dangerous anti-Semitism that has become suddenly real again in our time. Therefore, let me just share with you some good news in the battle against anti-Semitism, which I read just 5 minutes before coming out here this evening. Today's papers announce that a French court has just ruled for the first time in Europe that the BDS movement is illegal because anti-Semitic. And we will do everything we can to make that French ruling a ruling right across Europe. Friends, let me begin, because it is such a serious subject, with just a minor note, because this is my favorite story about anti-Semitism. It concerns two Jews sitting having coffee together in a Viennese coffee house in 1933. One of them is reading the local Jewish newspaper, another one is reading the notoriously anti-Semitic publication Der Stürmer, and the first says to the second, how can you read that anti-Semitic rag? And the second looks at the first and says, you're reading the Jewish press, what does it say? It says the Jews are arguing, they're dividing, they're quarreling, they're declining, they're disaffiliating. I read my newspaper, what does it say? The Jews control the banks, the Jews control the media, the Jews control the economy. No, if you want the good news about the Jewish people, always read the anti-Semites. But the truth is, I begin with an autobiographical note. I always believed, when we got to that bit in the Seder about Shaloah Echad Bilvad Amad Aleinu Lechalotenu, that not in one generation alone, but in every generation they rose against us. That, for me, was our parents' world. Not ours, not us, born after the Holocaust. Knowing that everyone had pledged themselves never again. And I have to say, growing up in Britain, growing up among non-Jews, becoming a little bit of a public figure in my own right in British society, never once did I encounter a single episode of anti-Semitism. So it came as a real shock to me when in 2002, our youngest daughter came back, then at university, came back from an anti-globalization rally, which quickly turned into a tirade first against America, then against Israel, then against Jews. And she came in with tears in her eyes and said, "Dad, they hate us." The English novelist Dame Rebecca West once said that Jews, having known what they have known, have an unsurprisable soul. It was that evening in 2002 when I saw my daughter in tears and anti-Semitism return that I discovered that I have a surprisable soul. Because the truth is that if there was one commitment Europe made after the Holocaust, I was there on the 27th of January 2000 when the heads of all European nations gathered together in Stockholm to commit themselves to continuing the work to ensure never again. And almost immediately thereafter, a new anti-Semitism was being born. Anti-Semitism is a very difficult phenomenon to understand, because the truth is, it is a bundle of contradictions. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Jews were hated because they were poor, and because they were rich, because they were communist, and because they were capitalist, because they kept to themselves, and because they got everywhere. Because, said Voltaire, they believe in an ancient superstitious faith. Because, said Stalin, they are rootless cosmopolitans who believe nothing. Anti-Semitism is not a belief but a set of contradictions. And the only way, therefore, we can understand it is to think of it as a virus. Just as a virus attacks the human body, so anti-Semitism attacks the body politic. And the body has this most remarkable system called the immune system, which detects and repels viruses. And viruses are able, nonetheless, to survive because they mutate. What makes the new anti-Semitism so worrying is because it is happening after the most determined attempt in all of Western history to construct an immune system so complete that anti-Semitism could never happen again. 50 years of Holocaust education, 50 years of anti-racist legislation, 50 years of interfaith dialogue, and yet nonetheless it is returned. And that is why it is so serious. The other reason that it is so serious is because, at the end of the day, we have exhausted all the alternatives. Let us not forget that much of modern world history was born in an attempt to confront anti-Semitism. After centuries of persecution in the Middle Ages, when Jews were expelled from one country after another, where they were accused of desecrating the host, of spreading the plague, of poisoning wells, of, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam, killing Christian children to use their blood, the blood libel, sadly, tragically, born in England in Norwich in 1144. The nations of Europe came together in the 19th century and constructed something called emancipation, which gave for the first time civil rights, equal civil rights to Jews. This was the attempt to say that religion having failed to protect against hatred of Jews in the name of God, we will now try the secular nation state. Jews will integrate, they will assimilate, they will become like us, they will become good Frenchmen, Germans, Austrians, and anti-Semitism will be at an end. It was specifically in the 19th century that anti-Semitism was reborn. Racial anti-Semitism, the word itself, was coined in Germany in 1879. So the attempt to cure Europe of Judeophobia by emancipation failed. And then came the second great attempt. Zionism was born in the recognition that emancipation had failed. It was by the end of the 19th century, with the pogroms in Russia and the Dreyfus trial in France, that a number of Jews, most famously Theodor Herzl, came to the conclusion that it was no longer safe for Jews to be in Europe. And therefore they should leave Europe and go to the Middle East, the land of their origins, and that is how secular Zionism was born. Herzl believed that once Jews had a land of their own, a state of their own, once they became kachol hagoyim, like all other nations, anti-Semitism would end. What has happened instead is that the birth of Israel did not bring about the end of anti-Semitism. Indeed, it has brought about a new form of anti-Semitism. Indeed, that is the anti-Semitism of our time. I can put it very simply. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated for their religion. In the 19th century, they began to be hated for their race. Today, they are hated for their nation state. Anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. And Amos Oz put it most poignantly. He said that in the 1930s, anti-Semites stood and said, Jews to Palestine. Today they stand and say, Jews out of Palestine. He said they don't want us to be here, they don't want us to be there, they don't want us to be. And that is why there comes a time when you say enough. We cannot take this anymore. We have to make a stand. And that is why I wrote Not in God's Name, as an attempt to get to the very roots of anti-Semitism and to say to Christians, to Muslims alike, we cannot allow this anymore. This is not religion, but a desecration of God's name. So what I tried to do in the book is to get to the very roots of anti-Semitism. And I want to say that although many people believe that anti-Semitism is inevitable, that it is somehow written into the scheme of things, what did Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai say? Halacha yudua she'esav soneh et Yaakov. I say that I humbly disagree. There's nothing whatsoever inevitable about anti-Semitism. Nowhere in Tanakh did it say it is our destiny to be hated. Nowhere. And even the very text cited to prove that anti-Semitism is eternal says, in fact, the exact opposite. If you look up the full quotation, and this, of course, is on that last encounter between Esau and Jacob, where it says in the Shako, he kissed him, and there are dots over the letters. Omar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, halacha biyadua she'esav soneh et Yaakov, ela ba'ota sha'a nichbaru rachamav uneshako b'chol kocho. Shimon Bar Yochai says, even though in general Esau hates Jacob, nonetheless at that moment there was a true meeting of brotherliness and compassion, and Esau kissed Jacob with a full heart. So even the very text that is often used to say anti-Semitism happens always does not say anything of the kind. And the truth is that not all cultures have given rise to anti-Semitism. It is remarkable that the two powerhouses of the new powerhouses of the 20th century, India and China, two civilizations as old as Judaism, never had anti-Semitism. There's no history of anti-Semitism in China or in India. Where do we find anti-Semitism? We find anti-Semitism in Christianity and in Islam. Therefore, I found myself looking very closely at the roots of the relationship between the three Abrahamic monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And at the same time, I spent 13 years studying the connection between religion and violence. And I want to share with you the insights of the two greatest writers on that subject in the 20th century. One of them was, of course, Sigmund Freud, who wrote about it in 3 books, Totem and Taboo, The Future of an Illusion, and his last book, which he completed in London, not far from where we live, with his whole world having gone up in flames, Moses and Monotheism. And the other one, a Frenchman who taught here in America and published in 1976 the most influential book on religion and violence, René Girard, whose book Violence and the Sacred is the key work here. What made Freud and Girard different is that they reversed the normal relationship. People have said in the past, religion gives rise to violence. Freud and Girard said, no, violence gives rise to religion. Very interesting insight. So what was the primal form of violence according to Sigmund Freud? As you know, for Sigmund Freud, the original driver of violence is what he called the Oedipus complex, the hostile relationship between sons and fathers. And Freud argued in the 3 books that I've mentioned that this applies to religion likewise. The sons get around, gather together, they resent their father, the alpha male, they kill their father, and then they are haunted by guilt, something he called the return of the repressed, and that guilt comes back as the voice of God. That is Freud's view of how violence gave rise to religion. Now this is an interesting theory, but I have to tell you, if you look at the history of myth and religion, you will not see that the fundamental theme is the tension between fathers and sons. And this is what René Girard pointed out, that the fundamental story that animates violence in ancient myth is actually sibling rivalry. That is the story in Egypt between Set and Osiris, in Greece between Atreus and Thyestes. The founding myth of Rome is Romulus and Remus, one brother kills the other. Hamlet begins with an act of fratricide. Claudius, Hamlet's uncle, kills Hamlet's father and takes his throne. And that, according to Girard, is the primal driver of violence, sibling rivalry. Now, what is absolutely fascinating, I never expected this, it was a real discovery, is that Freud knew this also. Wherever in Freud's writings he writes about sibling rivalry, his writing catches fire. He is absolutely convinced of the passion and the danger of sibling rivalry, and yet he did not make it the center of his system. He left that to Alfred Adler. Why did Freud know that sibling rivalry, not the Oedipus complex, was the fundamental driver of violence? And why did he not make it the center of his system? Because he needed a little bit of psychoanalysis. It turns out that Freud was the only boy in a family of girls. They spoiled him rotten. And then, without consulting him, his mother had another boy. Freud was far from pleased. And he seems to have harbored really not nice thoughts about his little baby brother, Julius. Julius died before his first birthday. And it seems as if Freud, for the rest of his life, had an irrational feeling of guilt, that it was his thoughts, his negative thoughts, that somehow led to his death? We don't know, but that is what many of Freud's biographers, including the most famous Ernst Jones, came to the conclusion. So the truth is that sibling rivalry turns out to be, according to Girard, and really and truly according to Freud, the fundamental source of violence in human history. And the second we say this, we begin to find something very interesting. Because what is the theme of Sefer Bereshit? It is sibling rivalry. We have 5 stories of sibling rivalry in Bereshit: Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, and the 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel. And that is very, very interesting. But what I didn't realize is that this not only defines the great narrative thrust of Bereshit, it is also at the very heart of the relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Does anyone know what the first Christian texts were? The first Christian texts were the Pauline epistles, the letters of Paul, written from around the year 40 to around the year 60. That is to say, 10 years before the first of the Gospels, the Gospel of Mark. Now, Paul, as you know, was a Jew who left Judaism, experienced some experience on the road to Damascus, became a Christian, and did something very interesting. Paul created what is called the Gentile church. There were, as you know, in the Roman Empire, many, many people who were had adopted bits of Yiddishkeit, but had not become full converts. There are 2 problems. Number 1, Tariag mitzvahs, which is quite a lot when you come to think about it. And number 2, Brit Milah, which if you're a grown adult can be a painful experience. So there were 2 things that stood in the way of Gentiles becoming Jews. But it was among those semi-converts, known as the Anavim or the Yirei Hashem, or they had various names, that Paul conducted his missionary activity. Paul created a new religion because the original church, which was known as the Jerusalem church, led by Jesus' brother James, was basically, they kept all the mitzvot. They lived as Jews, Messianic Jews. And so Paul, creating this new religion for Gentiles, developed something in competition with the Jerusalem church, which after Churban Bayit Sheni more or less disappeared, leaving Paul's Christianity as the one survivor. The result is that Paul had to argue 2 things, which he does in all his writings. Number 1, that if you're a Gentile Christian, you don't have to keep Tariag mitzvahs. You don't have to keep mitzvahs at all, because we're justified by faith, not by works. And number 2, you don't need Brit Milah. Now, in one of his earliest letters, the letter to the Galatians, he is dealing with a community of Gentiles who have become Christians, but keeping the mitzvahs of the Jerusalem church. And he is very angry with them and tells them, you're Gentiles, you don't need to keep the mitzvahs. And this is what he says. He says, Abraham had 2 children, one by the free woman, Sarah, the other by the slave woman, Hagar. Now, Jews who are slaves to the law are the children of Hagar, whereas we Christians who are free from the law are the children of Sarah. In other words, Paul tells the Galatians that we Christians are Isaac and the Jews are Ishmael. 20 years later, in his letter to the Romans, he quotes This coming week's parasha. Shnei goyim b'vitnei. Rivka is pregnant with twins. And she goes, and they conflicted. And God told her, Shnei goyim b'vitnei, shlein lu'umim mimei ula'om mil'om yamatzva rav yavod sa'ir. The elder will serve the younger. Now, Jews and Christians, who are the younger? Christians, we're the new church, we're the new Israel, we're the younger. They, the Jews, are the elder. So we are Jacob. And they, the Jews, are Esau. It was left to the church father Cyprian in the 3rd century to say, we with the clear eyes are Rachel, and the Jews whose eyes are weak are Leah. And that is why on many entrances to European cathedrals from the Middle Ages, you will see 2 women. One very beautiful one, the church, and the other one with a veil over her eyes, and that is Leah, and that's the Jews. And it was left to the 4th century church fathers, including Tertullian and John Chrysostom, who was perhaps the most anti-Semitic of all, to draw the ultimate and terrible conclusion that because the Jews were responsible for the death of Mashiach, they are guilty of the first fratricide. We are Abel and they are Cain. And you remember the fate of Cain, to be Navanad Ba'aretz, a restless wanderer on earth. So though the 4th century church fathers never intended it, it was that led to all the exiles and expulsions of Jews in the Middle Ages, because they are the wandering Jew. They carry the mark of Cain. Of course, Islam then came along and did the same thing simultaneously to Judaism and Christianity. They said, where does the covenant descend from? It goes from Abraham to Ishmael. And why does it say in the Bible that it went from Abraham to Isaac? Because the Jews falsified the Torah, as the Rambam says, according to the Muslims, Torah muzuyefeti. We forged the Bible to say that it follows Isaac and not Ishmael. Now I want you to meditate on what this means. What this means is that Christianity and Islam have built into their foundational narrative the story they tell themselves as to who am I, a set of sibling rivalries. And it is sibling rivalry, according to Girard and Freud, that is the fundamental driver of human violence. Let me be very blunt with you. If, let us say, what is a, we now know incidentally, as Freud and Girard didn't yet, because this has been more recent discovery, sibling rivalry runs right through the animal kingdom as well. You know, with birds, there's something called the pecking order. Have you come across that? It's a bit like Kiddush, only. Yeah. So, here it is. You're the first chick that's been born. You're the firstborn. You're a bit older and stronger than number 2, and number 2 is a bit older and stronger than number 3. So number 1 will elbow the others out of the way until it's had enough food. And if one of the other chicks wants to get the food, they will have to drive the other one away because there's only so much food to go around. So if you are number 1 and I am number 2, you are standing between me and my very life. You are an existential threat to me. I have to get rid of you if I want to be the place I want to be. Now, with animals, the thing in short supply is food. What is it among human children? What's in short supply? Mum. Maternal attention. If mother is looking after, is caring about A, child B feels, why isn't she looking at me? So the logic of sibling rivalry is the logic of scarcity. There isn't enough of X to go around, and if you are my sibling, you are standing between me and what I most need. Now, the second I discovered this, that it is actually sibling rivalry that is the cause of the violent animosity throughout history between Jews and Christians on the one hand, and between Muslims and Jews and Christians on the other, I suddenly realized that in fact there's something very odd indeed about applying this logic to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Does it make any sense whatsoever to say that God's love is a finite commodity, such that in order for God to love me, he has to hate you? Or in order to choose me, he has to reject you? And I suddenly realized that it may be that the Torah is telling us something very deep indeed, something that we never really needed to know until the 21st century, but which has suddenly become terribly powerful and very vital. And here it is. Let me share it with you. Because what I do in the book, having analyzed the roots of violence between the three Abrahamic monotheisms, is I then go through every single one of those sibling rivalry narratives in Bereshit. And I show that in addition to the surface meaning of those narratives, there is an underneath narrative, what I call a concealed counter-narrative, that is telling us something else very different indeed. It turns out that the Torah is saying something about the connection between religion and violence. It's saying something right at the beginning. The first human recorded religious act leads to the first act of violence. Cain and Abel offer a sacrifice. Cain kills Abel. The connection between religion and violence is stated right there in Bereshit chapter 4. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows this, and he warns Cain of this. And once we realize this, we begin to see something rather unusual, something rather challenging. I want to ask you the following question. We read it just a little while ago in Shul. We read it indeed on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Bereshit chapter 21. I want you very carefully to think this through. Bereshit 21 talks at the beginning about the birth of Isaac. And then you remember when they grow up and Isaac is weaned and Sarah sees Ishmael, Mitzachek. And she tells Avram, send away this woman and her son, etc., etc. Avram is reluctant. Hashem says, Shema b'kolah, do it. And then we see Hagar and Ishmael go out into the desert in the heat of the noonday sun. Their water runs out. Ishmael is dehydrated. Hagar realizes he is about to die. She puts him under a bush. She can't bear to watch it, and she sits a little way away. I want to ask you, if you read that passage without the Mefarshim, where are your sympathies? You cannot read that chapter without sympathizing with Hagar and Ishmael. It's impossible to do. You read it with all the commentaries and your sympathies are no longer with Hagar and Ishmael, but read it without the commentaries. You are forced. The Torah is written in such ways to force us to see and feel with Hagar and Ishmael. And that's indeed what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. He hears the voice of the Lord, Basher Husham, and he blesses him, and he too I will be with him, and kings will come from him, and all the rest of it. And we see leaders come from Yishmael. In other words, the Torah is saying, yes, maybe it's Isaac who is chosen for this destiny, but God doesn't reject Ishmael. We are going to read this coming Shabbat, the extraordinary chapter 27 of Bereshit. You remember the story? Isaac is old, he's blind, he wants to bless Esau before he dies. go and prepare me some food. Rivka here, she says to Yaakov, go and I will give you food and take the blessing. And if need be, dress in Esau's clothes. And he does, and he takes the blessing in disguise. And then he leaves the room. And then Isaac hears Esau come in and asks, who are you, my son? And at that moment, there is one of the most dramatic passages in the whole of Tanakh. I want you to think about this. You know that in the story of Akedat Yitzchak, there is not one word about the emotions of either Abraham or Isaac. We don't know what they feel. But listen to what the Torah says when Esau comes in to take the blessing. Vayecherad Yitzchak charada gedola ad ma'od. Isaac trembles, a very great trembling. And Esau, vayitzak sa'aka gedola umara ad ma'od. Esau lets out a loud and bitter cry. There is no more explicit statement of emotion in the whole of Torah. And who are your sympathies with? It is written in such a way that we cannot read that narrative without sympathizing with Isaac and with Esau. Now just work this out. We know it is Rivka and Yaakov who will carry forward the covenant. And yet we cannot but empathize with Esau and with Isaac's desire to bless Esau. That's why there's so much midrash. Because midrash wants us to feel there's some simplicity here, so there's some black and white. But actually the text is very deep indeed. And it is telling us that there's one way of reading those stories when we're young and simple-minded, but there's another way altogether when we're grown up and we realize how dangerous sibling rivalry actually is, and when we remember that's how violence was born, Cain versus Abel. And God is telling us, don't think that because I chose Jacob, I reject Esau. That is what Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Israelites. Lo t'ta'eh v'domi ki achicha hu. Do not hate a descendant of Esau, because he is nonetheless your brother. In other words, the Torah properly read is telling us the danger of sibling rivalry and the fact that it simply doesn't apply to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't have to reject you in order to choose me. He doesn't have to dislike you in order to love me. It doesn't work that way. And if that is the case, then the Torah is identifying the roots of human violence, and it is telling us that we can find our way beyond it. That we were wrong to ever think that Christians, in order to vindicate the truth of their faith, had to get rid of Jews somehow or condemn them to be eternal pariahs, or that Muslims, in order to be in a proper relationship with God, have to say that Jews and Christians falsified the Bible. None of that is what religion is trying to tell us. All we have to do is listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu speak to us through these narratives, and we will realize he is telling us, V'rachamav al kol ma'as. Every single one of us, regardless of color, culture, class, or creed, is b'tzelem u'dimut HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And that, of course, we always knew, because we always held that Chasidei Umot Olam yesh lahem chelik le'olam haba. We always held that anyone who behaves in a godly way has a share in the world to come, Jewish or non-Jewish alike. It is that Christianity and Islam denied, and it is that made them murderous towards Jews. And we have to be able to say that there's another way of reading the Bible. There's another way of defining who we are. And this way of sibling rivalry is not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. We have reached a point in the 21st century where emancipation having failed, Zionism having failed to dispel anti-Semitism, we have to say enough. Here we make no further moves. we stand and we say, this hatred, which is directed to us and to our people and to our state, is not in God's name. We have had enough of people hating in the name of God of love, or of killing in the name of the God of life, or of waging war in the name of the God of peace, or practicing cruelty in the name of the God of compassion. Now, what possibly can give us some hope? Move Christian beliefs that have lost such murderous offense? The answer is because they too are suffering. We know that anti-Semitism has returned. But do not forget that Christians are being intimidated, terrorized, butchered, and crucified throughout the Middle East. Million Christians, today less than 400,000 and falling fast. In Mosul, Iraq's second city, where there's been a Christian presence almost since the very beginnings of Christianity itself, there are now 0 Christians left. Those who stayed were crucified, beheaded, and generally driven out. The last church in Afghanistan was burned to the ground in 2010. All Syria's 800,000 Christians have been made refugees, and I am proud that it is the Jews of Britain who took the initiative, took the lead in rescuing Christians from Syria. Lord Weidenfeld and others saying thank you to the Christians who saved Jews during the Holocaust. We are going to save Christians from Syria. In Gaza, in 2007, the last Christian bookseller was told by Hamas, close your shop. Being a good Christian, he didn't. First they burned it to the ground, then they slit his throat. No more Christian literature in Gaza. So today, 100 years ago, there were 20% Christians in the Middle East. Today, 4% and falling. I call this the religious equivalent of ethnic cleansing. And so today, we can stand side by side with Christians because they realize what this sibling rivalry is costing them. But let us make no mistake, the number one victims of radical Islam are Muslims. 90% of Muslims are killed by their fellow Muslims because they stand on the wrong side of the radical moderate divide or the Sunni Shia divide or this tribal loyalty and that tribal loyalty. ISIS has 200 million Shia in its gun sights. And the end result is some extraordinary, devastating civil war is shaping up in the Middle East between, on the one hand, the radicals of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, on the other hand, the Shia force of Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, and who are terrified by this? Not just Israel, Saudi Arabia is terrified. I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a sense of humor because Saudi Arabia has had to go to Israel and said, please lend us Iron Dome. Which is nice, really. We'll all stand under the chuppah together. The truth is, right now, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, for the first time in history, have to stand together, otherwise we will fall separately. And therefore I believe that the time has come for a major rereading of our texts and revision of our beliefs because they no longer make sense in a world where we have such power of destruction. And I have to say this, what gives me hope? My book has been out for 4.5 months in Britain. One of the first people who asked for an advance copy were the British government. The Archbishop of Canterbury, whom I didn't send it to, he bought it, whether it read it, wrote me a long letter and said we've got to do something about it, and on Monday morning, although I'll be in New York at the time we're doing it through video, I will be addressing a group that he has assembled, the Archbishop of Canterbury, which includes imams from Egypt, from Lebanon, from the United Arab Emirates, from Pakistan, leading clerics from around the world, including Africa. I was very moved that last week, or this week, I can't remember which, Irshad Manji, a very courageous young Muslim thinker, wrote a beautiful review of the book for the New York Times. In Washington, I will be having a public conversation with Akbar Ahmed, former Pakistani High Commissioner in Britain, now head of Islamic Studies in the American University, and Christians and Muslims have been the most enthusiastic readers of this book. So the truth is that we can find another way. It's not a quick fix. It is the task of a generation. But we have to begin now. And I want you to know that Christian and Muslim leaders have responded, and responded warmly. And therefore, I think we can finally say why all this matters. Because the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Hitler. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Stalin, and it won't be Jews alone who suffer under ISIS. And the truth is, why were we hated? Haman said it best. Yeshno am echad mefuzah uforad ben amim v'datehem shonot mikol am. Jews are different. We were hated because we were different. Anti-Semitism is the paradigm case of dislike of the unlike. But the truth is we're all different. In fact, difference defines what makes us human. Because each one of us is different from every other. Even genetically identical twins only share 50% of their characteristics. It means that none of us is substitutable by anyone else. And it is that that makes us unique, that makes us non-substitutable, that makes life itself sacred. A world, a society that has no room for difference, has no room for humanity. And we've finally reached the stage when the world has now begun to recognize that anti-Semitism is not just about Jews. It's about our very humanity. And I believe we can stand together and defeat it together, so that no longer will brothers murder one another in the name of God. We will stand together as one extended family of God. Friends, thank you for being patient in a rather serious topic. But I think it is the most serious one we face, not just Jews, but humanity in the 21st century. So let me just end with a little story just to cheer us up, because the truth is that with a little bit of Jewish ingenuity, there is no problem on earth that cannot be solved. So I end with one of my favorite stories. It's set before I was born. In 1947, when relations between the British mandatory power and Israelis was not that great. And concerns Chaim, who was found by the British to be gun running for Haganah and imprisoned in the British military prison in Akko. So there he is in prison. And his wife, Chenya, writes to him from the farm, from the Moshav. She writes, "Dear Chaim, it's all very well for you to go and be a hero for the Jewish people. But we have a farm to run. We have potatoes to plant. We have the fields to plow. How am I supposed to do this on my own? How am I going to do this without you?" The next morning, Chaim sits down and writes his wife a letter. "Dear Chenya, whatever you do, don't touch the ground. There are rifles buried underneath." The letter is intercepted by the military authorities. The next morning, the farm is overrun by British soldiers. They dig up every single inch of the fields. They do not find one single rifle. They return disconsolate to base, and the next morning Chaim writes, "Dear Chenya, now plant potatoes."
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of us all, I once again want to thank Rabbi Sachs, not only for what he says, not only for how he says it, but for the way he lives the ideals that he represents. Rabbi Sachs, it is truly an honor to have you in Chicago, truly an honor to have you here at this event on behalf of the Ida Crown Jewish Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Sachs will also be available. He'll be signing books across the hall in the Beit Midrash. There are books for sale also immediately when you exit this doorway if you would like to purchase one. He will be here. If you are just having learned and now you want to leave, there are also doors that lead straight out onto California Avenue. Thank you all for joining us this evening. December 13th, we dedicate the new Ida Crown Jewish Academy. Shavua Tov.